Ladies and gentlemen, good morning. Afternoon, sorry. We try to put these talks on, generally between 6 o'clock to 7 o'clock when we get more people who are able to come from work and so forth. The lunchtime hour is not ideal, but I wanted to catch Professor Andrew Hamilton for at least an appearance, because he is the second busiest man on earth that I know. And if you ask me who the busiest person on earth is, well, he is also number one. So to capture him for an hour is something that I wanted to do, and in fact, I was very pleased to be able to get out of a lunch at the Chelsea Flower Show, and I've sent my mother-in-law instead to represent me. And today, I want you, first of all, warmly join me to welcome the Vice-Chancellor of Oxford University.
Thank you.
The format is very simple. Those of you who have been here before will know. Those of you who's come for the first time, I hope will also return. Very informal. We don't give speeches. We don't have PowerPoints. We don't have boring dissertations. What I encourage all our speakers to do is to say whatever they want. I then exercise my prerogative to ask them a couple of questions, and then I want to open the speaker to the floor, to you, so that you can interact directly with our stellar participant. And without further ado, I want to ask Professor Hamilton to tell us what he's going to talk about, not only about the extraordinary excellence of this extraordinary institution called Oxford University, but also in the modern world, how it has become connected with the rising power of China and the infiltration, no doubt, of a great many Chinese people within the university. And I'm sure that the Vice-Chancellor will have all sorts of statistics, riveting, to tell you. And so, Professor Hamilton, please.
Thank you. David, hopefully not too many statistics, but what I wanted to do today first is to thank David and this incredibly dynamic and innovative idea of a China exchange in the center of London, a place where links to China are so critical for the modern day, for business, for cultural exchange, but where historically China has played such an important role. And I wanted just to discuss with all of you and take a slightly broader perspective than the title that I gave today, which was Oxford and China, but actually to ask all of you in our dialogue after my words about what the role of universities should be. Universities generally, but certainly leading universities like the University of Oxford, what our role should be as the relationship between the UK and China moves forward. Because for Oxford, as all of you know, is a very ancient institution. It's been around for nearly 900 years. And it won't surprise you that Oxford has actually had a relationship with China for a very significant chunk of that 900 years. And the relationship first began, rather remarkably, in the year 1604. We know exactly which year China first really became part of the world of Oxford University. At 1604, the first Chinese book arrived in Oxford from Europe. It was acquired in an auction in Holland, and it was the first of many, but the first Chinese book came in 1604 to Oxford's famous Bodleian Library. And remarkably, that was at a time that no one in Oxford was able to read Chinese. So this book arrived, and literally in the University of Oxford for the following 80 years, no one had a clue how it should be held, what way up, and certainly had no idea what it meant. It wasn't until 1687 that the first recorded Chinese person to come to Great Britain, this was the first Chinese person recorded to travel to Great Britain. His name was Shen Wuzhong, and he came to the UK. I guess it was Great Britain in those days. It wasn't a United Kingdom, and I guess it won't be a United Kingdom for much longer. But nonetheless, he came to Great Britain for one single purpose, which was to come to Oxford University and catalogue, by then, the very large and growing collection of Chinese books and manuscripts. And it's a stark reminder. I like to point out to politicians, the Chancellor of the Exchequer, the Prime Minister, that it really does matter that universities in this country commit to the long term, to the study of things that we have absolutely no idea what their purpose will be, whether it's particle physics or whether it's Chinese manuscripts that no one could read and no one had the slightest clue whether China would be important or relevant in the future. The consequence of that is that now Oxford University has one of the finest collections of Chinese books and manuscripts outside of China. And of course, for us, that was the beginning of a very important and a relationship that has strengthened from that day. In the next key date in Oxford was 1876 was the year in which Oxford appointed a professor of Chinese studies. So for 150 years, we've had academics in Oxford who have focused their teaching and their research on China. And of course, that has now led to, in 2015, to a very extensive connection to China, and one that has followed two principal approaches. The first is, of course, to attract Chinese students and Chinese academics to the University of Oxford. And so now in 2015, we have more than 900 Chinese students studying in Oxford, undergraduate and graduate. We have nearly 200 professors, academic teachers and researchers who are Chinese, who have come from China and are now carrying out their research and their teaching in Oxford. It gives you a sense of the way in which China is completely infused in the life, in the academic activities of Oxford University in the county of Oxfordshire. And of course, what does that mean? It means the culture, the language, the influence of China is very apparent, very clear in Oxford University. And that means wonderfully that all of our students, whether they come from America, from Sunderland, whether they come from Africa or Australia, all of our students are exposed to Chinese culture, Chinese history, Chinese language. And I would argue that's a very important role for a university like Oxford, that we have students who come from all over the world, and they are able, even in damp Oxford, damp little Oxfordshire, they are able to learn about China and be exposed to Chinese culture. Of course, it goes far more than that. We have a lot of academics studying the history, the contemporary politics, the economics of contemporary China, as well as archaeology, as well as Chinese medicine in our medical school. And so within Oxford in 2015, we have a very strong commitment to making sure we bring the world to Oxford. And one of the things they learn in Oxford is about China. We've now really put a stake in the ground in the importance of China in the 21st century in the building of a new building called the China Center, the Dixon Poon, funded from a wonderful Hong Kong-based industrialist, Dixon Poon. And this was opened last year by Prince William. It was opened very sadly for us on the very day that the pregnancy of Catherine was announced. So she was supposed to be there as well. Everyone in Oxford was incredibly excited, and we had to make do with Prince William, but that wasn't such a bad thing. I'm very fond of Prince William, actually. I think he's a very good thing for the royal family, and I think he's a very good thing for Britain in general. And he's a good thing for one reason, in my mind, as well as his many other good reasons. He is making baldness fashionable. And I think for people like me, that's a rather good step and a development. Anyway, Prince William came and opened our China Center. And again, I said there were two great pillars of how a university like Oxford can connect to China. One is bringing the world to Oxford and having them learn from Chinese students, Chinese academics about China. The other, of course, is to send Oxford to China, to engage in China in issues of critical importance to China and to the world. And so that is the second really very important pillar of our relationship. We have many, many major collaborations and even large numbers of people from Oxford and from Chinese partners in different parts of the country working together on common problems of humanity in the 21st century. We have a wonderful initiative on chronic disease. China, as all of you will know, is a wonderful place to study human disease because there are 1.25 billion people, and there is also a very strong and indeed improving healthcare system which provides an enormous amount of information about lifestyle, human lifestyle, and its connection to disease. And so we are involved in a collaboration involving several hundred people in Fuwai Hospital in Beijing, working with them on more than 1 million patients, looking at the link between lifestyle, smoking, drinking, exercise or lack of it, and chronic diseases like heart disease, cancer, things of that sort. Really learning through our partnership with Chinese scholars, learning about the nature of human disease. We have a very similar and a very extensive relationship with 55 hospitals around China studying depression, and particularly depression in women. We have more than 12,000 women who are part of a study about the societal factors and the psychological factors that lead to depression. Again, a good example of the way in which partnership between a university like Oxford and China can help us understand the origin of a very, very, very draining and important human disease. We work very closely in China in a number of universities in the area of business education. We are part of a wonderful program sponsored by Goldman Sachs, which is called the 10,000 Women Program. It's encouraging women in rural China to be engaged in the development of their own micro businesses to the advantage and to the development of economic activity in rural China. And a key part of that, of course, is business education. And our business school is a key player in those partnerships. And then lastly, and I could list many, 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 many hundreds of connections and collaborations, but lastly, it won't surprise you, in the area of Chinese archaeology and Chinese history, we have archaeologists on digs working with archaeologists in China. We have very strong Chinese language programs, working with students going from Oxford, living and learning the language in China. So again, you can see the role that Oxford has taken is this twofold approach. One, to bring people to Oxford to learn about China, but the other is to send people from Oxford very much to then, with Chinese partners, to learn about issues that are specific to China, history, archaeology, economics, politics, but also are common to humanity, like human disease. And I think for me, this now raises the general question that I'd like to discuss with all of you. Is that the right approach? Is that having the kind of impact that we would hope in the UK in strengthening ties to China? What's fascinating is that it's not the only approach we could take. And what David didn't mention is that my time as Vice-Chancellor of Oxford will be coming to an end at the end of this calendar year. And I will actually be going to the United States, and I will be going to a new role. I'll become the president of New York University in Manhattan. And any of you who know NYU will know that it's taken a different approach to a relationship with China. It has opened a campus. It has opened just outside Shanghai a campus for several thousand students from all over the world, including America, and it is teaching courses in Shanghai that relate to courses in New York. And any of you who know the University of Nottingham in the UK know that Nottingham have opened a campus in Ningbo and are offering courses to Chinese students and students from around Southeast Asia, and providing a nice flow of those students then to come and study in Nottingham. And so it's fascinating. We see NYU and Nottingham, and actually other universities around the world, taking a very different approach to connection and engagement with China. Oxford, we haven't done that. Cambridge hasn't done that. Harvard hasn't done that. Stanford hasn't done that. So different universities are taking different strategies. We felt in Oxford it was very important to tackle issues of great significance to China. Less teaching and more research. And so hence the study of chronic disease like heart disease. Hence the relationship to partners in China as we learn more deeply about the history of China and the archaeology of ancient China. For me, these are all fascinating questions of what is the most effective way of engaging. And of course, what are we really talking about? We're talking about the way in which the relationship between the UK, the US, Europe, and this great force, this incredibly powerful economic, political, and indeed military force in the 21st century. And it's critically important that we get it right, because we have a long century ahead of us, and the strength of this relationship will help determine whether it's a positive and constructive century or whether it's one that will be filled with tension and dangers. For me, there are worrying issues on the horizon, and I think this is a setting to start to explore them. You will have seen, all of you with knowledge of China, that the recent years and certainly the change in leadership in China has brought quite a crackdown in universities in China. Many of our partners, Fudan, Tsinghua, Beida, Shanghai Jiaotong, many of the universities that we partner with have been under quite intense pressure with a strengthening of the party control over what is taught and what is studied. That is a worry. You know, we have to worry about our relationship and our students studying and the academic opportunities that they will have. But we also have to worry about the strength of Chinese universities, because despite what you might think and what the press would love the press would love to portray universities like Oxford and Cambridge and Harvard and Yale as scared of the Chinese universities like Beida and Tsinghua. We aren't scared at all. We encourage universities. We want Beida and Tsinghua to be strong and to be major forces in the intellectual development of China and the world. And so we love competition. We thrive on competition, and we want Chinese universities to be our equals so that we can compete with them and collaborate with them. And so for us, it is a worry that this recent trend in political developments in 21st century China is restricting even more tightly some of the things that are talked about and debated in Chinese universities. I think there's another area that for us, as we seek to encourage more and more students to come from China to universities like Oxford, the Gaokao. The Gaokao is a very important, you all know it, many of you took it. The Gaokao is the examination that all Chinese students take. And making sure that we can rely on the Gaokao, and of course, making sure that the Gaokao represents a proper measurement of student ability. And that's something that for we in universities really does matter, because we need to make sure that the quality of the students that we recruit will be commensurate with the demands of the courses that we will ask them to take. So these are fascinating times. It's a wonderful time to be the Vice-Chancellor of a university like Oxford, because the future is opening up with so many positive possibilities, so much knowledge to be created and developed in partnership with our friends, our colleagues in Chinese universities. But there's no question, with some dark clouds really gathering around how those relationships will develop and how free our colleagues in Chinese universities will be to exchange their ideas with us. I think for me, what is absolutely critical is that Oxford, Cambridge, Harvard, Yale, NYU, that we very much continue this commitment despite the challenges that do lie ahead, that we can continue this engagement, because it's through that engagement that the next generations of young people with their fresh ideas and their new ways of helping China move into this preeminent position in the 21st century, it's through education that will be most effectively achieved. And so let me stop there and thank you all very much for listening. I'd love to hear from you. Have we got it right? Are we underperforming in our relationship with China? Should we be opening a campus tomorrow in China? And if so, where? Should we be more concerned about some of those dark clouds that I've been describing? So thank you all very much for listening to me. Thank you.
Well, as expected, many provoking thoughts there. But let me just perhaps start off by asking the professor two questions. Number one, just to get the scale right, you say that there are 900 Chinese students there in Oxford now and 200 academics. That's just over 1,000 Chinese in Oxford. How much does that represent the non-British population? I mean, is that the largest, or is it?
No, it's not the largest. The largest in Oxford are Americans. So we have about 1,400 students from the US, undergraduate and graduate, and as I mentioned, actually over 900. We've got about 920 students from China in Oxford at the moment. We have 20,000 students of those 20,000 students, about 8,000 of them are from outside the UK. So 40% of our students are from outside the UK. So you get a sense. The Chinese students represent about 12, 13% of the international population.
But no doubt they will catch up with the Americans very soon. The Yellow Peril.
I think there's no question, and we hope they will.
Yes.
And we hope they will. And let me just say that the Chinese students, it will not surprise you, make themselves very visible in Oxford and lively. They have one of the most active student associations. They certainly cook the best food of the international students when we have international festivals, as we do relatively frequently in Oxford.
I just hope that they don't cook their books.
No.
But is there, how about romance? Is there a great deal of romance between...
The Vice-Chancellor is responsible for many things at Oxford University, but the romance we leave to our students to get on with themselves. So I couldn't possibly comment on the romantic inclinations
but just,
of our Chinese
I know
students.
these are artificial statistics, but out of 1,100 Chinese, how many female, how many male?
Oh, I think, I can't pull the exact numbers, but I would say very 50-50.
50-50. Well, there it is.
I certainly know anomalous. Let me point out, this is a general issue in education, I think, and we'll see how people react when I say this. One of the biggest crises in higher education across the world, certainly the Western world, is the underperformance of males. And we're actually seeing quite significant drops in academic performance of 17-year-old. We're now talking about applicants. So the 17-year-old male is seriously underperforming at the moment,
Really?
David. And that's something we should be worried about, because, of course, it means that when we are looking at applications, we are now seeing quite a number of courses in Oxford, and I know this is true at Harvard and Yale as well, where the large proportion of students are female. And no, that's wonderful. I'm certainly not opposed to that, and I encourage it, and long may it continue. But it's a worrying trend.
It's obviously very good news for feminism.
Well, and A-level results and SAT in America, results of the 17-year-old male are declining in relative terms. I blame, and here I do think China has an element of responsibility, but so does Silicon Valley. I blame computer games without any Grand Theft Auto or whatever is the current 17-year-old fixation.
All right. Look, listen, as I promised, let's open the floor. Who has got an intelligent question? Now, don't forget, you are asking the Vice-Chancellor of Oxford University. So if your question is stupid, it will reflect very badly.
No, it won't.
Of yourself, this place, and my reputation, and everything that we stand for. So be careful. An intelligent question, please. Yes, all right.
This is exactly the opposite of the way we approach these things in academia. There is no such thing as a stupid question.
So
the only stupid question is one not asked. So go on.
Sorry. I ask one very simple question. You said the very early 17th century, in 1604.
1604, the first books arrived.
The first book arrived to the Oxford University. I'm very interested. What's that book about?
Oh, I knew someone would ask that. Of course, I cannot answer that, as I am an organic chemist, not a China scholar. So it wasn't about organic chemistry. I don't know the answer to that, and we need our wonderful Bodley's librarian, who could give you a treatise on the nature of the early Chinese manuscripts that came to Oxford. But I suspect it will have been a historical treatise. It will have been a historical book. It won't have been someone's shopping list or someone's laundry list, but it will have been something of significance in the historical record of China.
But
Thank
of
you
course
very
you've
much.
had your
Thank you.
scandal as well with Hugh Trevor Roper, famously, with his series of diaries that he uncovered in the vaults in Switzerland, and subsequently wrote a book called The Hermit of Peking about Sir Edmund Beckhouse. And those books, or those diaries, were turned out to be forged.
Yeah.
So you also have a fair share of a bit of scandal at Oxford. So warts and all.
Well, in Oxford we thrive on scandal, but every now and then we face it as a vice-chancellor, and one of my challenges in life is managing the reputation, hoping not to damage the reputation. And every now and then, I do think, when I have a bad day, I do think some poor vice-chancellor must have had it worse than me. And I can point to one.
Who's that?
I can point to one. I wonder what it must have been like to be the vice-chancellor of Cambridge University on the morning that Burgess and Maclean turned up in Moscow. Now, David and there are far too many young people who won't know who Burgess and Maclean, but they were Cambridge graduates who then led to this series of Russian spies at the highest points of the MI5 and MI6 who were all linked to Cambridge. And that's a reputational damage they've never been able to live down. So forgive me from descending into a little bit of Cambridge. I am a Cambridge graduate, so I'm allowed to say rude things about Cambridge.
Anthony Blunt, was he Cambridge?
Yes, he was.
Was he? Are you
Yes,
sure?
he was.
Right,
They
all
were
right.
all Cambridge.
All
we
Cambridge.
do prime ministers rather well, but we allow Cambridge to do the Russian spies.
I think they were probably excused because in the early days, a bit of ideology was, of course, part of the reason why you have universities, to have rebellions, rebels thinking enormous things like Marxism and socialism.
Yeah.
So I don't really blame Burgess and Maclean.
You don't have to justify him, David.
Yes. Burgess, in fact, kept his tailor at Savile Row for a long time, and there was a very famous play called A Gentleman from Somewhere, I can't remember where. Burgess, after having lived in Moscow for 25 years, ordered a new suit, and it was a brilliant play. I think Arnold Bennett might have written it.
Yeah.
All right, sorry.
Just
I digress.
while we talk about Cambridge, of course, you do understand where the rivalry derives from, and it is that we actually took opposite sides in the English Civil War. That the Oxford was royalist, backed the king, and Cambridge was Puritan and backed Oliver Cromwell. And you even today, if you look at the Chancellor's clothing in Oxford, Chris Patten, man with great links to China. Chris Patten is Oxford's Chancellor, and Chris wears this glorious gold leaf gown with a train and a page boy, and it's truly regal in its magnificence. The Chancellor of Cambridge, Lord Sainsbury, wears a very plain black, a very simple white bands, and it's Puritan. And in fact, you know, it's one of the interesting consequences that Harvard is named after John Harvard, and John Harvard was a Cambridge graduate because he was among the Puritans who fled England after the Civil War had while Cromwell won, it didn't last long, and then led to the flood of Puritans from England to North America. And so it is, however, it is important for me to point out while we say the comments about Cambridge.
But it befits Lord Sainsbury to be dressed down. He's a butcher. Okay. Somebody who would like to ask another question.
Yes, in the yellow.
Hello, Andrew. Nice to meet you. You mentioned about the idea of open campus in China.
Yeah.
Actually, I think it's a really good idea because why? Is I experienced Gaokao, And I was lucky I can come to the UK because of my support from my family, give me the
Yeah.
enough tuition fees
Yeah.
and living fees.
Yeah.
But I know a lot of genius students,
Yeah.
they
Yeah.
they really excellent, but
Yeah.
they doesn't have so much support from the family side, other the university side or government side.
Yeah.
So if it can open the campus in the China, it will be really good for students who doesn't have so much financial support,
Yeah.
but also, in China, the Gaokao is different. They have different level for even in the same exam paper, they have different level for different province. It depends on the population of the province.
Yeah.
So, such as in my province, it's a very high level for we go to the Peking University, Tsinghua University. So, if you you also talking about how to select people if open a campus in the China. I think the Gaokao is one of the way to look at it, but also people who have some special talent and they know what they are going to study, what they want to study in the future. If you have this kind of examination, I think it will be really good for some students who didn't pass Gaokao very well, but still have talent and still doesn't have financial support. Because I know some of my classmates, they currently study in Peking and Tsinghua University. But not most of them can go abroad, such as Oxford University, Cambridge, is when they are past the undergraduate, they are graduate.
So graduate school.
But it's a lack of time.
Okay.
So
You are right. You are right, and I can see exactly what you're saying. There would be an advantage there. Let me say two things. I do believe, even for those students of low economic opportunity, it is still very important to travel abroad. It's still very important to get, as you have done, the experience of living in a different country, different culture, different language. For us in Oxford, Cambridge is the same. We are trying very hard to increase our financial support for Chinese students. And we've had some wonderful donors, a number of them introduced to us by Sir David Tang, donors who have helped us provide scholarships for Chinese students. I think the issue of a campus, and as I said, I am about to go to a university that's opened a campus. In Oxford, it's quite hard for us to really consider. We are based on colleges, just like Cambridge. And to recreate an Oxford college in Shanghai or in rural suburban Beijing would actually be very hard, because the college is both historical, it also has, we have wonderful libraries like the Bodleian, that would not be in Shanghai. We have wonderful museums like the Ashmolean that would not be in Shanghai. We have wonderful weather, where it rains all the time in Oxford, and that would not be Shanghai. And so I think recreating an Oxford education in Shanghai would be quite hard, not impossible, and I would say it's something that in Oxford in coming years people will think about, for the very reasons that you said, that we are missing wonderful talent, geniuses, that was the word you used. We are missing geniuses, and it's great. We want geniuses and smart people to come to us. And if we can find a way to achieve that more effectively, then I suspect in the future we will.
I mean, for what is worth, my view is that it is an excellent idea to have a campus in China, because you are encouraging, as long as you do, foreign students coming into China and studying and understanding the social and the vernacular aspect of modern China. A lot of people write about China, a lot of people study about China, but if, as a foreigner, they don't live there, you really miss out a great deal. So you are, in effect, transporting a very valuable population of foreigners into China to understand what it is all about.
Yep.
But also within China, for those who have not been able to travel abroad, I know your view that everybody should be given a chance and they still need to be encouraged. But nonetheless, for the thousands and tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands, if they could only interact, just as if you go to the Bund one day, all the Chinese love stopping the foreigner to practice their English with. And that's the kind of thing which you are contributing, perhaps even subliminally. So I'm all for it.
Well, and
it doesn't what?
That doesn't help our Chinese.
when you, yeah.
I went to Harvard at the University of Cambridge. I've been the director of in about 20 months, I was teaching all these directors' kids and the teachers.
So you know, the immersion in Mandarin is also important. You know, David, I agree with you. And in one of the things that I've been really pleased to see in the last few months is the announcement that many of you will have seen. The American billionaire Steve Schwarzman has created what he calls the Schwarzman Scholars Program. It's modeled on the Rhodes Scholarship, which was to bring people from around the world to Oxford. This Schwarzman Scholarship brings people around the world to Tsinghua and to be sure that they get that experience that you're describing.
Well, of course, Schwarzman. I was the first director of Blackstone in Hong Kong for Schwarzman, and he was also the first person to have got the money from the sovereign fund to run Blackstone, and so he's made a lot of money. And I think that he's now so rich, and I think what he has done is also marvelous. And
Good that he is giving his money. He also announced last week 150 million to Yale. Good that he's giving his money to education rather than a Premier League football team or an NFL American football team, which many of them do.
yes, well, there it is. Yes.
Yeah,
No,
go
you
on,
need
yeah,
to because
it's recorded.
it's
Go on.
recorded. You see.
Go on.
I did read an article about your future university that they're not only accepting people on academic grades, but also their potential as a person, not just looking at their exam results, which I thought was quite interesting.
You mean NYU?
Yeah. Because, I mean, I left school at 15 and never really got a formal education till I got a scholarship from the Chinese government to study Chinese. So.
One of the things, and this is a general issue about all leading universities, NYU, Harvard, Yale, Oxford, Cambridge, is that we thrive on excellence, the comment the lady behind you made. We thrive on bringing geniuses, on smart people. But of course, we have no desire to limit the socioeconomic profile, the racial, the international profile. We just want bright people. And so getting those young people, even those without financial resources, to come to the university is really important. But we have to be careful, because if all you do is look at the scores on an SAT exam in America, let's say, or A-levels, those can be tutored, and that advantages people who can pay for tutors. And so doing exactly what you said, which is looking beyond paper qualifications, looking people in the eyes, interviewing them, Oxford and Cambridge, uniquely among British universities, still interview all of the students who apply to study as undergraduates. And if you ever want a fun experience, come to Oxford. It's usually the 2 weeks before Christmas. That's when, after the terms ended in mid-December and before people leave for the Christmas holiday, and that's when all the 17-year-olds are being interviewed for admission. And Oxford interviews are very challenging. They cannot be prepared for. They are not asking you to regurgitate what you learned in class. They are asking you quite wacky, off-the-wall questions, seeing how you think, how you process a question that you've never seen before, and that's aimed to get at exactly what you're describing, the academic potential of people, not what has been forced into them by expensive tutors.
Yes.
Just that.
Thank you. Hello, I'm interested in your thoughts about cultural exchange as a way of projecting the university into China. Now, we've got a particular interest in this because we work for a music management company, and we've recently started working for the Oxford Philharmonica.
Oh, you
which is
did?
which is the resident orchestra.
It is
of the
indeed a
university.
wonderful orchestra.
We have a brief to extend their presence outside Oxford
Into China.
internationally.
Yeah.
And of course, we have a particular interest in looking at China because it's such a big
Yeah.
and important
Yeah.
market in its own right,
Yeah.
but also one which has so many musicians at all levels
Absolutely.
coming out. So it seems to us to be a natural mix, but I was wondering from the point of view of the university, how valuable you think this kind of exchange
Oh,
can be.
immensely valuable, and the music is a wonderful way of crossing borders and cultures, and I'm delighted to hear that the Philharmonica its ambitions know no bounds, and that's wonderful. That's the way it should be. The cultural exchange is a very important part of relationship between nations. And Oxford, while music has a different place, we have been very heavily involved in cultural exchange through an organization in Oxford University that I've not yet mentioned, which arguably is our single most effective and successful cultural outreach from the university, and that's Oxford University Press. So Oxford University Press is a part of the university. It's a department of the university. It's an academic publisher. It publishes educational materials, academic monographs, English language materials, and of course, dictionaries. And we have had a presence in China. OUP has had a presence in China for more than 50 years. OUP publishes the most authoritative English-Chinese dictionary in the world today. We launched it about 5 years ago in London with the Chinese ambassador, this wonderful new Oxford English-Chinese dictionary. We are educating millions of school students in China in their English language skills using OUP materials. And it has a wonderful, let me give you one example. It has a wonderful connection to the political world as well. And on one of my early trips to China as Vice Chancellor of Oxford, I met with Mr. Li Wanchao. And Li Wanchao, if you know Chinese politics, is Vice Premier currently, one of the most significant and powerful political figures in China. And I met with him. I had an hour conversation with him. And it was really wonderful because almost tears came to his eyes because he said the first city that he ever heard about outside of China as a child was Oxford. And why? Because the dictionary that he was using in his rural China school was an Oxford dictionary, and it had photographs of Oxford University in it. And so he had been aware, here's this most powerful figure, he had been aware of Oxford from a very early age. And so I don't think one can overstate the importance of cultural exchange. And in Oxford University, we are playing our part, we hope, through the good offices of Oxford University Press.
Any other question? Yes. Any other question? I was going to ask you something which people might not be too conscious of, but which I regard as the single most extraordinary form of education that is unique to Oxford and Cambridge and to one or two other British institutions, and that is the one-to-one tutorial. I was very lucky, although I didn't go to Oxford, to have had the one-to-one tutorial in London, in Cambridge later, but I thought it was an extraordinary way of teaching, where you would go and simply sit in a room for an hour with your tutor, and not in a class for thousands or hundreds or even 15 or even 10. Now do you think that system is going to be lost in the future?
I think we should be worried about its possible loss, David. But right now, Oxford is utterly committed to the tutorial system. It's the way we define ourselves. You've described it perfectly. It involves a student, one-on-one, sometimes 2 students to 1 professor, spending an hour each week. Students usually have one or two tutorials each week. And you can imagine it, one-on-one with your tutor. You have absolutely nowhere to hide. No, it's not like doing what I always used to do, which is sit at the back row of a lecture room and slither under the desk whenever questions were being asked. In an Oxford tutorial, you have nowhere to hide. Your gaze, the gaze of your teacher, is on you. And it's often said in Oxford that the hour tutorial is important. Even more important is the 15 hours of preparation that you've done out of fear in that 1-hour tutorial, because you're doing that preparation on your own. You're self-motivating, you're self-studying, you're developing self-discipline, and that's what a higher education should be. It's taking the mind to places that it's never been before, and doing so not because a teacher is standing over you, making you memorize poetry or whatever, but because you are driving yourself to then be effective in the tutorial. And it's very common in Oxford to hear freshers, 18-year-olds, absolutely petrified, knees knocking as they go into a tutorial because of their fear of being found out or not having read the book or not having prepared. By the end of an Oxford undergraduate degree, our students are arguing with their tutor. You know, they're telling their tutor where they're wrong. And of course, what that develops, and you know, I think this is no coincidence, what that develops is intellectual self-confidence. And intellectual self-confidence is very, very important. And it's no coincidence, you know, sorry about this propaganda, you know, it's no coincidence that prime ministers, endless prime ministers over the last century have been Oxford graduates. And the current one is, the previous one was, Margaret Thatcher was, Alec Douglas Hume was, Macmillan, you know, just the succession of successful politicians, 10 members of the 24-member cabinet that is now sitting, governing this country, 10 members are Oxford graduates. So it gives you a sense of the dominance. And I think that comes in no small part because of this intellectual self-confidence. The ability to argue, the ability to, forgive me in this public place, the ability to bullshit. You know, these are skills that serve politicians well in life, and but they are also, they come from an intellectual rigor and an intellectual self-confidence that is the tutorial system.
Let me ask you my last question, because I don't want to hold it, but it is very intriguing to me. In the light of what is happening in the world in terms of communications and the intrusion, the almost revolution of the internet, and the readily availability of information as such, which some people conflate with knowledge perhaps. What does Oxford do in face of these vastly and very fast changing behavior, and what do people say? Do your tutors get together and say, are we going to discourage people like him now looking at his iPhone? Or do we encourage them to do so all the time?
Yeah.
And should they have to commit to memory things, or should
Yeah.
we let them Google anything they want at an examination?
Yeah.
I mean, how does the modern
Fascinating.
world impact on
I-
an ancient institution like Oxford?
My short reaction is we embrace it. You know, there's been a lot of rhetoric over the last few years about universities being swept away. There's been reports published, the coming avalanche, that universities will no longer exist 50 years from now. Everyone will get their education online. And I like to remind people, the internet information revolution is remarkable. It's changing all of our lives. However, Oxford was already 300 years old when the previous information revolution took place, and it was called the printing press. And we embraced the printing press, and it changed the way Oxford did business. It was very bad if you were a scribe copying books by hand and you lost your job, but it actually allowed universities to propagate knowledge and study the world more effectively. The internet will allow exactly the same thing. Now, you ask specific questions about what should we be expecting of our students. And I think we have to get a balance. The idea that no student will ever be able to recite Shelley again would be rather a sad thing to contemplate. The idea that a scientist would not know, I'm a chemist, would not know the periodic table, even though they can get access to it intimately, is a very sad thing. The idea that we'd lose the ability to speak a second language because we can go to Google Translate would be a very sad thing. So I think we do have to remember the power of study to expand the mind. And it is well known that, and I know that in the audience there are many bilingual and trilingual people here, and it is well known through psychological study that the academic performance of people who speak 2 and 3 languages is superior to the academic performance of monoglots. And the power of study and memorization to expand the mind is very real, and it would be a great shame if we lost that. Do I think we'll allow people to search on Google in their examinations? Not in the short term. We've banned computers. We've banned iPhones. Now, it won't surprise you, we're having to ban iWatches. So, because,
What, in lectures?
Not in lectures. Lectures are fine, because that's part of almost, it's the equivalent of having your textbook on the...
Where do you ban the iPhone?
In examinations.
Oh,
in examinations, because... and we've even had students complaining, I need my watch. My watch is how I mark time. I've lost my security blanket because you've taken my watch away from me. And we say, dream on.
Anybody else want to close the session off with another intelligent question? Yes, all right.
Yes, go on, in red.
Thanks very much for this fascinating talk. It's very nice to have you here to tell us a little bit more about the relationship between Oxford University and China. Just got one quick question. As you mentioned, you do have some worries about expanding the Oxford University to China. So could you just want to ask you a little bit about if the value of Oxford University become in conflict with the maybe, for example, like political stance or the the trend of teaching and research in China.
That's a very important question. The values of Oxford and all great universities are engagement. No, the most important, the underpinning value. And so I do think that that is one that cannot be rejected, that we must be present, even in parts of the world that are quite oppressive, parts of the world, because it is only through engagement that we can hope for a better future. It does worry me, and I said that in my words, that the crackdown in the last couple of years on Western thought in China, in the teaching of Western values, the Minister of Education has said some pretty provocative things about teaching in China. But for me, that is not enough to cause us to slow down in our engagement, because it is, for me, through interaction, through education of students, through partnerships, that we show China what enormous benefit there is to be gained from freedom of exchange of ideas, from a wide debate around the important factors for a healthy society. And so, for me, they are worries. Of course they are, but they shouldn't deflect us from our purpose.
But also, there are extraordinary examples in history, all over history, where suppression actually engenders creativity. As we've found in concentration camps, creativity there, and the Gulag, Solzhenitsyn, Anne Frank, Messiaen. These are extraordinary people who, despite censorship and oppression, come up precisely with extraordinary creative results. So I mean, I'm not suggesting that we
This should be a policy.
There should be, yes. But nonetheless, life is very strange, that you can't have everything the same way. I mean, different ways yield different things. But we know that Oxford will always stand for excellence, and I want you all to join me in thanking the Vice-Chancellor of Oxford for coming today and giving us such a valuable hour of his time, when I know that he's got 3 million things to do, and also discussing many issues which have puzzled us and for which he has provided answers, and I'm extremely grateful, Professor, and please join me in thanking Andrew Hamilton for coming to China Exchange today.
Thank you.